So today we're going to continue with our subsistence strategy unit. We're on number 4 today because we finished up with number 3 the last time. So foraging, the oldest, pastoralism, next oldest, excuse me, I already made a mistake, not even a minute in. So foraging, the oldest, horticulture, the next oldest. That's why I rearranged the order in the book. Pastoralism, the next oldest, and also the next largest population density. That might be something that we didn't talk about. Did we talk about population? Okay, good. I guess we talked about everything about pastoralism. Larger population density, because that animal, the main source of calories now is an animal source, and you have higher calorie content in the food that's available. Okay, so anyway, so today we're going to talk about agriculture. And let me emphasize that agriculture is like coming into a more modern era of human history, like within the last 4,000 or 6,000 years or so is when we are talking about agriculture. And I'm going to describe agriculture like in the beginning of agriculture, not the kind of farming. And here's one of the things that I need to remind you. I've asked you to unlearn some of the things that you think you know about life in general, or just about making a living or subsistence strategies. Don't think of or don't reference in your mind farming like you might know it today in rural Arkansas with huge machines that can harvest 30 rows of crops at once, or, you know, that's not what we're talking about with agriculture. So try to prevent yourself, try not to allow yourself, that's how I should put it, don't allow yourself to make any assumptions about what you think you might know about agriculture, okay? So, agriculture, like I said, number 4 on our list. Agriculture is a larger scale production of crops or animal products for not only the use of your immediate social group, your family unit, but also for surplus, so that you can sell the surplus to people who do not produce food, okay? So agriculture is a larger scale production of either crops or animal products. Like maybe you have a dairy farm, or you have a cattle ranch or something like this, or you raise pigs or chickens or eggs or something. Those kinds of things can be part of the agricultural scene too, or it's fruit trees. It doesn't have to just be something that you harvest every single season. It can be you have olives, or you have whatever on trees that, you know, is growing also. But you manage it. So it's large scale production of crops or animals for with an emphasis on surplus. So here's that word surplus that I've used a couple times. You know, I've mentioned it a couple times. In class already, but this is the first time we've had a subsistence strategy that we said surplus does apply to this subsistence strategy. It does apply. It is one of your primary focuses, is surplus. The other subsistence strategies have not thought about food as something that you could put a price tag on and sell it and get a profit for yourself. But the word surplus here means that you have extra. You have more. The person or the group producing the food has extra. They don't need everything they're producing. They know they don't need everything they're producing. They are intentionally producing this extra for the purpose of selling it to people who don't have access to land, people who do not have the materials that they need, like seeds or equipment or whatever, to produce their own food. So food production has become a business. It has become a for-profit business. Okay, so the surplus has a major effect on social life, on social stratification, on the division of labor in society. It has a major effect on ownership, ideas about ownership. So remember with foraging, we said that you definitely don't think that you own the land. It would be opposite of that. You kind of belong to the land, is the way you would think about it in your enculturation process in foraging. Horticulture, you don't own land individually. There's just a general idea that the community has access to a certain amount of land that they've historically had access to because they need to cultivate it to keep the community alive. With pastoralism, we talked about how general territories, you have a general territory that is the understanding that your group can travel with your herd in that particular area, and your group can travel with the herd in that particular area. And that's where conflict comes in, when maybe there's some overlap to those areas because there's not like a definite line on a map. There's no fences or anything. You do have ownership in pastoralism. You've got ownership of those cows and goats or camels or caribou or whatever it is that your cultural group herds, right? But with agriculture, since surplus is the focus, it changes the whole game. Now you must have, whoa, computer's gonna fall off. Now you must have private property ownership. You must have access to land consistently, and you must control it and limit access to it so that you can control the surplus, control or own the profit, okay? So, with agriculture, food production is still the primary reason jobs exist in the society. It's the primary economic force is food production, crops or animal food production. It's still the primary job creator, but the division of labor that we've talked about with all the other subsistence strategies, it gets way more complicated. How do we divide up who is doing the work related to food production is, it complicates things. Okay? So, for instance, if you have a profit, or if your goal is to make a profit, land ownership is key. You do want fences. You do want lines on a map. You do want the county government or the state government or whatever to have a record about where your lines of your ranch or your farm is, or are, whatever word I need to use there. You want everybody to know where the boundaries of your land are, wherever, okay? Because that's the land you control. That is the land that's going to give you a surplus. Why do you want a surplus? You're not going to hoard it. You're not going to let it rot. You're going to sell the extra at something called a market, and you're going to sell it to a whole bunch of people who are not typically landowners, at least not in the way that not in a way that they produce some of the food supply. Okay? So, land ownership is key, and so those with land are like the first level, I'll use the word level, in society as far as social stratification. They are the upper class, the upper crust, if you will. Some scholars talking about the development of social class in the United States and elsewhere use that phrase upper crust. And so yeah, land ownership is key when you have agriculture. Okay. Then, since all of the jobs, the primary job creator is agriculture, you also have to have people who manage land, manage crops, manage a herd. The landowner, by definition, does not have to do that too. They don't have to do that. So you have somebody to manage the land and also offer high-level services to the landowners. So land ownership, Who's going to manage the land, like at the upper level? Who can I trust to manage the money, to manage the seeds, to manage the crop, manage the herds, arrange for all this kind of stuff? I'm the landowner. I could be doing that if I want to. But by definition, I don't have to, because the food produced on my land is enough for my wealth, because I'm going to own that profit. And I'm going to use some of it to pay a salary to somebody who, sometimes if I don't want to do it myself, I'm going to use some of it to pay a salary to people who will manage it for me. Then high-level services would include a dentist, a doctor, a pharmacist, people who own or manage mercantile stores, or maybe people who sell your surplus for you. You go to them and sell that. They are kind of like a middleman between the food production and the people who are going to eat it. Right? So those high-level services would include things like this. The reason these people have a job is because agriculture is happening. Surplus is happening. Population density increases significantly. Goes way up. Land under agriculture, a higher number of people, a larger number of people is supported. Much larger number of people is supported. Cities, not villages, not sedentary camps, not nomadicism, but cities are first on the scene in human history. Cities are popping up. Cities are popping up as centers to make a profit, centers to sell things, centers to not only bring your surplus to sell, but also get other services that you might need. Maybe you need clothing, so the clothing store is there, or the seamstress is there. Maybe you need a baker because you are not a wheat farmer. There are lots of things that you might need services. Some of them are high-level services, some of them are lower-level services. You would need things like teachers to teach you and your children, and the doctor's children, and the lawyer's children, and the shopkeeper's children. You would need teachers, but their job is available to them in their society because agriculture is going on. So food production is still the primary job creator. Even a teacher, you don't see that connection between a teacher and food production, but who is the teacher teaching? The kids of the landowners, the kids of the doctors, the kids of the lawyers, the kids of the bankers, the people who work, manage the farm or manage the land for the landowner, and also for a group of people that we can call the peasants. Peasants or paid unskilled labor. Paid unskilled labor. You don't know how to be a librarian. You don't know how to sew clothing. You are not a pharmacist. You don't have any kind of special skill. But in a world where land ownership is required for social position and for wealth and for surplus, you're going to have to do something to get money for food, because food is still a necessity for subsistence, but food has become something that has a price tag. I'll use the US dollar sign here to represent money in general wherever you are. Food has a price tag now. It is not seen as something that is just part of the basic definition of a human right. Not anymore. Not with agriculture with surplus. So you have some people who the only work they can offer is low-level, unskilled labor, working in the fields, tending the crops, harvesting, hauling things back and forth to the market to sell things. You have people with this low level of skill that get low level of pay, and they usually work for the landowner harvesting the food that they're going to have to turn around and buy from the landowner with the wages the landowner just paid them to harvest it. And there is one more level that's even lower than peasant. Can you think of what it is? Slave. You see slaves being a class or a category of people that is created by the fact that ownership of land or ownership of anything, because of course a slave might be skilled, might be unskilled. You know, you might have a slave that's a carpenter. That's a skilled trade, but that person doesn't get wages for it. Land ownership is important, and sometimes in some cultures, slaves are important too. Sometimes you purchase and use slaves as a commodity. Sometimes you have captured them in warfare or something. But slaves have been a part of agricultural societies, other societies too, although much less common in the world until you get to the surplus production that agriculture creates. So yes, so land ownership is so here's our social stratification. If you're a landowner, you're at the top. If you're vital to the landowner's productivity, you're here. If you have a high-level skill that you can offer, if you have a low-level skilled thing that you can do, like carpentry or teaching or managing laborers or something, you have a low-level service. If you don't have any kind of skill, you're going to sell your labor for as much as you can get out of it. You probably won't be able to sell your labor for too much at all, if any, in a society that has slaves instead. Most peasants don't have jobs where slavery is part of the system. Okay? So anyway, so you see major differences and some of the same differences in social stratification still exist. You'll still have males as the most significant people in society, with females holding a subsequent position. But you've got males and females both at all of these levels. You've got male and female landowners. You've got male and female peasants, right, at all of these different levels. So the major way of social stratification here is has to do with the market economy, has to do with the surplus that agriculture has changed the scene and brought about a surplus. Questions so far? I'm just going to wait till I see people stop writing, since maybe I'm going too fast. I feel like my coffee was very effective today. Maybe I'm talking a little too fast. So I'll slow it down. So much larger populations. There's going to be populations spread out, little villages all over the place, but when it comes to selling your surplus, think of your surplus as being more than your immediate village needed. In horticulture, not agriculture, but in horticulture, you had an immediate village, but the production was only as much as your immediate village needed. There was no surplus. You didn't need to take it anywhere to sell it. That's why cities start popping up, because you need like a central place where the market can be, so that you can bring your surplus milk, bring your surplus eggs, something like that. You know, if you don't have a market for it, meaning like people to sell it to in your immediate town, hubs where transportation is easy to get to, hubs like cities start popping up where people live and go and take their surplus to market to sell. Okay? Can I erase? Yes. All right. So let's talk about how do we manage this land that is owned by people now. Because the surplus, the focus on surplus also changes it changes the way you treat the land, okay? So with agriculture, you don't ever let land lie fallow. That's not in your enculturation process. If you grow up in an agricultural culture, you don't do that. Why wouldn't you do that?
You don't own that much land, so you need to use all the land you have for your crop.
Why do you need to use all the land? You do have set boundaries. I do have that. My family has this plot, and your family has this plot. So we know that there's a divide between us. But why would that prevent us from letting this lie fallow? Because you want surplus. Good. Exactly. Because you want surplus. You're wasting an opportunity for surplus and profit if you had that practice that they do in horticulture of lying fallow. Okay, you're wasting your opportunity. Kai, is that what you did you?
I was just gonna say it takes so much time.
Well, it does, yeah, and there's another reason. That's also going to eat into my profit. Letting that natural process of lying fallow and slashing and burn or SWID in horticulture, yeah, that takes way too much time. And that also goes right back to, it cuts into our surplus. So yes, now we have private land ownership, and I know distinctly where the boundaries are to my property, and I am focusing on surplus. So now I'm going to use all available land all the time. And since I want surplus, don't I want to keep that land's productivity up? What do I mean when I say land productivity? What does that mean?
Like the nutrients in the land?
Yes, we don't want to. We know that the crops are going to deplete the soil of certain nutrients. We know that, right? We have that in our enculturation process. We know that crops are going to deplete the land. We want to use all the land all the time, so what are we going to have to do to the land if we're not going to let it lie fallow and replenish those nutrients in natural processes? We're going to have to use, I'm going to use the word artificial here. We're going to have to use artificial fertilizer techniques. But so we're going to have to use artificial fertilizer techniques, but let me put like a little asterisk beside artificial, because I'm not talking about like chemical artificial, like exactly, that blue miracle grow stuff, right? Like whatever's in that, I don't know. I know plants love it, but I don't know what chemicals are in that, right? Stuff you can't pronounce. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is maybe cow manure. Maybe there is a dairy farm and they don't just sell milk. Maybe they are selling for profit manure to the corn farmer in order to replenish the soil with nutrients. That is an artificial amount of manure that would go into, or maybe I'm collecting that from the chicken farmer, or maybe once a year when the crops aren't in season, I'm letting the chicken farmer run his chickens all over my land or something so that it fertilizes that way. So you have artificial means, not chemical fertilizers themselves. Okay? But you do have to go through a lot of work to maintain the soil, because you don't want it to deplete nutrients. You also have complex methods of irrigation. Complex methods of irrigation. So for instance, here's my river, right? There's my river, and you've got a farm over here, or you've got land over here, and you've got more land over here. So, okay, maybe these individual landowners aren't going to go it alone. Maybe they're going to join forces together and they're going to say, you know what, I need some water from that river. Let's band together and let's build a canal. We'll all pay for it. We're going to build a canal that comes over to our land and puts a big pond or something where all of us can, or a reservoir, I guess is what you'd call that. A reservoir that will hold water for all of us so that we can all use it. So maybe that's some cooperation I might have in order to be able to get irrigation. But this canal was a heck of a lot of work, and you're going to have to maintain it all the time, and you're going to put it in and be permanent, right? Because here's your water source, and your farm is way away. You can't rely on rain all the time. That doesn't seem like it right now, right? With all the rain that's fallen for us. My yard is flooded. Anyway, so yeah, you have to have complex methods of irrigation, and that might be plumbing out to, you can think of the canal as plumbing or a pipe or something that takes the water from the natural source to you, or a very complex well or something, or multiple wells that you dig all over so that you can flood the fields when you need to, or provide water to the fields when you need to. So it's complex methods of irrigation. You're also going to use crop rotation. I think we had a question about this back when we were talking about horticulture. I remember somebody asking a question about crop rotation, and certainly horticulturalists would use that as a technique. They would know about the benefits of crop rotation in their enculturation process. Agriculturalists would do crop rotation differently. If I'm a sweet potato farmer, and you're a rye farmer, and here's a corn farmer or something, I can't just plant sweet potatoes over and over and over again, even if I am adding chicken scat to it every year. I can't just do that over and over and over again. I'm probably, in the off season, I'm probably going to plant like winter wheat or something. Maybe not to get the benefit of the wheat harvest, although maybe, but maybe just because wheat puts certain nutrients back into the soil that sweet potatoes took out, for instance. And I'm not sure if that's, I don't know my soil chemistry with botany and agriculture, but one crop might take a certain nutrient out of the soil, whereas another crop puts that particular nutrient back into the soil. And so in your enculturation process, in your land management plan that's part of your subsistence strategy, you would have those practices as part of your cultural adaptation if you're an agriculturalist. Make sense? Have a question? No? Okay. Seems like maybe you had a question. Okay. So, yes, you would practice crop rotation, but in a different, like a grander scale, I guess you would say, than what a horticulturalist would do. So I want to emphasize major differences between agriculture and horticulture. Surplus, of course, is the major difference you should think of. But what other difference do you see right off, or can you pick out by looking at your notes from horticulture? Besides the surplus, what other difference do you see about agriculture just right off?
Irrigation.
Okay, well, you do need I mean, you're going to have to know how to irrigate it is complex, but no, just from like the definition of horticulture to the definition of agriculture, like what major difference do you see? Agriculture includes animals. Good. That is what I was getting at. Because horticulture, your primary food source, your primary calorie source, I should say, is plant-based. Now, a horticulturalist, you've got your own little settlement, you've got your own little house, maybe you've got your own little backyard kind of thing in your little house. Maybe you've got some chickens back there. Maybe you're eating eggs, and maybe you're raising chickens as a horticulturalist. But you're not relying on that. You're certainly not required to do that by your subsistence strategy. And that's not the primary place where you get your food source. Your food source is going to be the crop that your particular community specializes in. With agriculture, you see the variety of crops go up, and you also see that not everybody focuses on growing plants. Some people focus on animal products. Okay, and they might grow plants secondarily as a feed for the animals that they're growing. Maybe the dairy farmer has fields of corn and wheat or whatever he's going to feed the dairy cows, right? Okay, so yeah, there's one major change. There's surplus. You've got huge differences in social stratification because now you've got private property. And you've got wages that people have to work for in order to eat. Food has a price tag. You have cities for the first time in human history. You have to get complex about your irrigation because you have to rely on it, right? If you're an agriculturalist and you are relying on a profit from your animals or your crops, you have to be able to predict your irrigation pattern. You have to be able to predict your unnatural fertilizer techniques. Even though you're using natural products like maybe manure or something, or ash. Maybe you are setting fire to a crop you intentionally planted, so you can burn it and work that into the soil. You're still going to maybe use burning, but you're going to do it not through the natural processes of a field that grew back after 60 years. You're going to do it by planting rye in October, and by December when it's green, you're going to burn it off or something and add that back into the soil. Okay, questions? Much larger population densities. Something is telling me I have forgotten a key thing about this to tell you. But if I remember, we'll go back and add it. Okay? Alrighty, so agriculture is still a subsistence strategy that is practiced in its pure form around the world. In your textbook, you will read about certain ways that agriculture is practiced in Egypt, for instance, in the Musha culture. So please make sure that you read about that, because I have described a situation where you've got like large fields and large ranches, and it doesn't necessarily have to be organized like that. They have a different kind of concept of row crops and land access in Egypt in the example that they use in your textbook. Okay, so we are finally back to our subsistence strategy that we kind of started all of this talking about when I had making a living on the board at the very beginning of this unit and said, what does it mean to you? We listed all those things. Okay, so now we've gone through 4 subsistence strategies where I asked you to forget all those things that we said. And now we're back to all those things that we said, because we can talk about the kind of subsistence strategy that you and I have, which is called industrialism. Industrialism. This is our subsistence strategy. It is going to, of course, focus on food. This part of this discussion is going to focus on food production. When we get to the economics chapter and we talk about industrialism, we will talk about other things having, than just the food supply being produced through industry. First of all, what does this word, when you hear this word, what do you think about? A business, okay. Factories, okay. Okay, so like the factory, large-scale production, right? Machines, okay, good, yes. So before, when we were talking about agriculture, the machine thing is definitely one of the things that I wanted you to think about. And that reminds me of the thing that I did forget to tell you, one thing about agriculture. So if you'll flip back in your notes and put this in your notes about agriculture. Yes, so in agriculture, you do have simple machines. You do have maybe a plow and a beast of burden like an ox or a horse to pull that plow and help you. You've got larger scale production of land, and so you're not just doing this with the little hand tools that we talked about you would use if you were a horticulturalist. Agriculturalists have the benefit of machines. Not complex machines. Like I told you at the beginning, don't think about a combine picking or working a field at 30 rows at a time. Don't think about a cotton picker out there that can, get most of the cotton off the plants instead of human labor. It's human labor is the core of how agriculture works, but you do have the benefit of machines that make things move more quickly. You do have the benefit of beasts of burden. Y'all remember what that means? Beasts of burden we talked about in horticulture. Horticulture does not have oxes and horses and mules and things like that to help you do the land. Horticulture is only hand tools and literally elbow grease, like my grandmother would say. But with agriculture, you do have help of draft animals. You do have help of what we call beasts of burden, machines, and that kind of thing. You helped me remember that when you said that industrialism reminds you of machines, right? Yeah. Okay. So now flip to where we're talking about industrialism, and let's go with this. So yes, industrialism, if you think about factories, if you think about businesses, if you think about machines, yes, this describes the kind of subsistence strategy that you and I live with today. So industrialism, regarding the food supply, is the factory production and processing of food for mass consumption, even global scale consumption. Not just taking it to a city that happens to grow up in your area just because markets need to be sold to the general area or the general, countryside surrounding that city. We're talking about factory production and processing of food for mass marketing and sales worldwide, really. Worldwide. Industrialism. You're talking about huge, what we call factory farms. Huge factory farms. I don't know if any of you all have been able to drive out or have ever needed to drive out to the outskirts of, like, outside of Pine Bluff and rice country out there where you just have hundreds of thousands of acres of rice production, or up north close to Springdale where they have just chicken house after chicken house after chicken house, those long Quonset hut looking things that are just filled with chickens. The chickens are not out in a general farm area where you're only growing, 5,000 chickens at a time. You're growing 5 million chickens at a time in an industrial factory farm, okay? So, and these chickens that you're growing are not just for sale to your immediate area. They are for sale in India. They're for sale in France. They're for sale, you're producing them here, and industrialism is going to allow you to get customers and make a profit far, on the other side of the globe from your immediate area, okay? So agriculture produced a surplus, yes, but the surplus, because of the manpower that was still required to produce that surplus, it only produced enough surplus for a general region. And so the city would build up that would service the general region. Now, you've got, a rice farmer in Stuttgart can export rice to Brazil in the southern hemisphere, right down the river to the port of New Orleans and beyond. You can export tons of rice that way. So that's what factory farming, that's the difference here. We're still talking about producing food in an agricultural type way, but we're talking about huge machines taking the place of human labor. Huge machines are taking the place of human labor. Land ownership is still important, but also who owns those machines? Not always. I mean, maybe you are the landowner and you would like to own the machines, but I'm the one who owns the machines. And maybe you can offer to buy them from me, and maybe we'll work out a deal and you can own them eventually. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the landowner that actually owns the harvesting equipment, or if you're a cotton farmer, there's probably somebody else who owns the cotton gin, for instance, and then somebody else who owns the t-shirt factory that's making the t-shirts or that kind of thing, right? So there's huge machines that take the place of most human labor, and only a very small percentage of the population, actually works directly with food production. Very small percentage of the population actually works with food production itself. There is a huge variety of jobs available, because since not very many people need to work with food production, because you've got massive production, super surpluses, massive amounts of things that are produced and shipped all over the world. You've got a whole bunch of other, like the division of labor is even greater. The division of labor becomes based on skill, really. Skill and education level. And a service industry. You have some people working in what's called a service industry that are really separated from the food supply. You know, think about, well, here on this campus, we teach people how to style hair and do manicures and pedicures and, you know, do those kinds of services that people pay for. How many degrees of separation is a manicurist's job from the food supply? I don't expect an answer to that question when I ask it, but think about the materials that they use and think about the the service that they provide, and there are probably 150 or more steps of separation between actual food production and the fact that we have a beauty industry or something that people go and pay somebody else to make them what they think of as pretty. Right? So there's huge differences in the work that people do, the way that work is valued. You definitely have ownership of resources, and that's how you would put it now, ownership of resources. It's not just land, because resources include money. Resources include the factories. Resources include the huge machines. Resources include oil, natural resources that you can make fuels out of, refineries, and all of these kinds of things. You need oil to be refined into diesel and gasoline because you have to put it in the huge machines that's going to harvest the food and put it in the giant ships that take things from China to Los Angeles and everything in between. So all of these things are part of the subsistence strategy. How do we get food from the earth to our bellies? Now it's coming from Vietnam. Shrimp in Walmart right now, you can buy a bag of shrimp, it says product of Vietnam. And I bet you it was swimming and alive like 6 weeks ago. But let's talk about that 6-week time frame, because I might be a little optimistic with that. One major change with industrialism is that you want your food to appear to be fresh. You want it to appear to be fresh for months and months, really. Are y'all going to go in and, are y'all going to go and buy a bag of bread out of Kroger if it looks like it has spots on it or something that you don't expect to be there? No, but the bread that you're buying out of Kroger might be 4 months old already, right? So, because of the mass production, the super surplus, that requires preservatives. You have to preserve things if you want to sell it. Are y'all going to go buy a package of ground beef that doesn't look nice and pink and fresh? If it starts to look a little bit brown, y'all probably don't even do any grocery shopping yet for yourselves. But if you go into the meat market in Kroger or Walmart or something, if there's brown ground beef right next to nice pink meat-looking colored ground beef, which one are you going to buy? And so producers of beef are going to begin adding preservatives that prevent the color change, or artificially make it appear a certain color that it wasn't before, okay? So the preservatives also include colors. It also includes hormones. because those chickens that we were talking about, if I spelled that word right, those chickens that we were talking about earlier, that you've got 5 million chickens at the chicken farm, these chickens don't have a whole lot of time to grow. We need to eat them tomorrow. And so the hormones are going to be added artificially to their feed in order to make them go from, I don't know, a couple of ounces to a couple of pounds in a matter of weeks instead of a matter of months or even a year. So hormones are going to be added for growth. By the way, those chickens are cram-packed really tightly in these long Quonset hut-looking chicken houses that they've got. And you know that animals can catch diseases from each other, can get sickness from each other, especially if you're too close. And so another thing that we're going to add to their food supply, just from the get-go, is antibiotics to prevent any kind of viruses or bacteria, not viruses, but bacteria, right? You might add antivirals to their feed also to prevent viruses, sorry, from being transmitted. But you're going to add antibiotics, you're going to add hormones, you're going to add colors, you're going to add preservatives after the, whatever it is that you're producing is harvested. You're going to add stabilizers. You are going to genetically modify, y'all have heard of GMO before? You are going to genetically modify the organism, genetically modified organism, whether it is a plant or an animal. You will want to genetically modify the organism so that it makes it easier for you to produce a super surplus that lasts a long time and survives shipping from Costa Rica to the banana counter in Walmart down the street. You want the bananas to be nice and pretty and yellow, right? Not bruised and brown and spotted by the time you eat them. So the banana plantations in Costa Rica are going to spray the bananas before they are ripe with a chemical that retards, that word, slows down. The chemical retards the ripening process so that they can stay green and hard during shipment. And guess what? They get to this soil and we're going to spray them with a different chemical that makes them go ahead and start getting ripe, so by the time they get to Walmart for you to buy them, they are the color that you expect them to be. I have modified the ripening process. I have added chemicals to the outside. Maybe I did not go in and alter the DNA of those bananas, but some products I'm going to do that. Some products, because I'm going to add artificial pesticides and artificial herbicides. What do those two words mean? What's a pesticide and what's an herbicide?
Pesticides kill bugs or pests, and herbicides kill weeds.
Exactly. Anytime there's the side on the end, whether it's infanticide or homicide or patricide, it means you're killing something. In this case, you're killing pests like bugs in general, or maybe even moles or something like that is eating your crops. And herbicide is killing weeds and things that invade your crop and maybe prohibit it from growing with high success. And so maybe your genetically modified organism is a particular type of corn that you've gone in and changed the DNA so that an herbicide like Roundup, y'all heard of Roundup before? Maybe an herbicide like Roundup, which kills everything it touches in my experience. If you spray Roundup on any green patch, all of the green will turn brown and die. This is an artificial chemical. I don't know what it's made of, but some people have genetically modified corn or wheat or lots of other crops so that they can spray Roundup all over it, and the Roundup won't kill that. It'll kill the weeds that you don't want in your crop. And so all of these things are done because the mass factory production of food has become a major business, a major industry that is for mass marketing worldwide of products. I don't really know if it's true, but there's at least an urban legend that somebody took a Twinkie, which all of us probably know and love, Twinkies. Some urban legend that some mechanic someplace in a mechanic shop took a Twinkie and nailed it to the wall and just left it on the wall with a nail in it, and like checked it regularly, and it stayed like, it didn't stay moist, but it stayed, you know, nice and yellow and fluffy looking for year after year after year. I'm sure it's a myth.
When I was pregnant, when the Twinkie company closed,
Yes.
and so suddenly all I craved were Twinkies.
Of course.
And my husband went and bought every Twinkie he could find in the area, and they were molded in 2 weeks.
Oh
It was
no!
tragic. It was
So
really tragic.
so you thought you were gonna have your
We
pregnancy
thought
craving
they were-
satisfied.
Yeah, we thought they were self-sufficient.
Yeah.
That was it. They are
Yeah.
perfect.
Yeah, so it's an urban myth. However, the Twinkies that you got probably were already like 6-8 months old by the time they ended up from packaging to trucking to shipping to the very back of the shelf that he found everyone he could find to bring it home to you. Yeah, so you're not gonna you're not gonna buy them if you don't expect them to be fresh or there's a word that we need to redefine, don't we? The word fresh. What the heck does that mean? Right? So anyway, for industrialized food supply, fresh means it looks okay. Fresh means maybe I have to add a color to it so that you think it looks okay. Fresh means I have to add antibiotics to it so that it doesn't make you sick. You don't feel like it was spoiled or something. Any kinds of artificial chemical stabilizers. With industrialism, you don't just have cities like we described in agriculture. You certainly still have mid-sized cities, like Little Rock is a mid-sized city. But instead, you've heard the word, I'm sure, metropolis before. Have you heard the word metropolis before?
Yep.
Yes, because that's where Batman lives, right? Or close to metropolis is where Batman lives. But anyway, a metropolis is an enormous urban area, or an enormous city area with sectors, and each of the sectors could be called, a city by themselves, and it has huge ports and huge centers for exchange. A metropolis is a ginormous, if I can make up that word with you all, it's a ginormous place where lots and lots of people live and engage in economic activities with each other that are usually far, far, far removed from the factory food production techniques. There are lots of different cultural groups that you would find in a metropolis, and so you end up with huge places like Los Angeles or San Francisco or New York or Johannesburg or Rio de Janeiro or any of these places all over the world that have major seaports and major rivers going through them and major transportation hubs to get all of this global food supply to where it needs to go. Much bigger than, is it Batman who's in Metropolis or is that Superman? Is that
I was
Superman?
about to say Batman's in Gotham City.
Batman's in Gotham. That's right. Okay, but Gotham is a metropolis.
It is.
Yes,
It's just not called
because it's just not called Metropolis. That's a Superman is a metropolis. Okay, I know one of those characters was one of those places. Yeah. Okay. So, questions about agriculture, about industrialism, about anything? This is this is us, right? This is our subsistence strategy. So when y'all said, oh, we need to, making a living means you have to have a job to pay bills, think about all those bills that we've got. You know, a lot of us have a bill for, for Netflix or something. That bill, that is not part of the food supply, right? But so that is an entertainment cost. We have some free time because we're not producing our own food. We're not even making our own bread. We don't have to do any of those things. We can go, some of us might feel like we would starve if bread stopped being delivered to Kroger, right? We would have no idea how to make our own tortillas or bread or cakes or pies or whatever it is that we eat. So industrialism has made it easier to get more food available to more people, but food still has a price. This is a for-profit system that we are talking about. And so with agriculture, yes, but not nearly as much as industrialism. You've got so much food available, yet you have people starving to death because of lack of access to funds or lack of access to it. You've got people who aren't allowed to grow their own crops because big companies that create GMOs or get government to make certain things illegal, like it's been illegal for years and years to produce tobacco. It's not a food crop, obviously, but it's a recreational crop, and it's been illegal for years and years, century, to produce your own tobacco, because you've got big corporations that want to control the tobacco, and so if you're able to grow yours in your own backyard, you're not going to buy my cigarettes from me, and I want you to buy my cigarettes. So you've got like a whole lot of restrictions and laws and stuff that happen regarding crop production or food production. Does anybody know there are certain ordinances about how many chickens you can have within certain city limits? Anybody know that?
In the city of Little Rock, you can only have 4 pets regardless of the pet.
That is true. Sherwood and North Little Rock and Little Rock, you can all have 4 pets, and they consider chickens pets. But I think it's 3. I think in Little Rock you can have 3 max chickens.
I don't know.
And I think it is 4 pets, you're right.
I know they do have a law that you cannot use more than 1/8 of your yard to grow, to grow food.
See, so these kinds of
And you also
laws,
can't burn, you can't burn.
yeah, so you couldn't use that way to fertilize stuff. Yeah, so see, these laws and stuff about what you can and can't do about producing your own food, that creates a situation where we're going to have to buy some of our food from somebody, right? And it also creates resistance movements to industrialism that you actually will talk more about them in chapter 6. But there are some resistance movements to industrialism, like going off the grid or farm to table communities and that kind of thing, that doesn't like the fact that, for instance, you can go into Kroger at any time of the year and buy grapes. Well, grapes have a growing season, and it's not growing season for grapes right now in Arkansas. So there is this philosophical movement about being a locavore. Have y'all heard that term before? Y'all heard locavore? You know the word omnivore or herbivore? Yeah, so omnivore, you eat anything. Herbivore, carnivore, you eat meat. Herbivore, only products. Locavore is a word, I think it was added to our official dictionary like 10 years ago or something. But a locavore is somebody who only eats food that's produced within a certain radius, 100 miles or something from where they live or something. That's the definition of it. But anyway, so being a locavore, or only doing farm to table, or going off the grid, or moving to a place intentionally to avoid those kinds of ordinances that you're talking about, Renee, those would be resistance movements to industrialized food supply. If you don't want antibiotic-laced chicken, and some people are even marketing that now, right? They're marketing, hey, this is organic, meaning we never added any of this or this. We never added any chemical fertilizers, only the natural stuff. We didn't genetically modify this particular crop because this is, it's, some people are, and in my opinion, rightly so, worried about what this could possibly do to us when we ingest stuff like that. There's a lot of studies and a lot of information out there about what these things do to us when we ingest them, right? Because if you give chickens hormones, it gets stored in their meat, and when you eat the meat, you're getting the hormones too, right? So now there's marketing schemes where, we've never ever once given our chickens hormones or antibiotics or anything, and so that's some people are drawn to that, and you will pay more money for that marketing trend. Yes, Sam.
I'm taking meat and seafoods, and the chef there, he told me that they're starting a development where you can eat chicken while that chicken is alive. So like,
Oh my goodness, I'm not sure if I even want to know about that.
So you just take a piece of it, let it grow, and it looks like chicken, but it's not chicken.
Oh my goodness, this sounds like a dystopian movie that you're talking about.
Yeah, he said it's creepy because it looks like chicken, but it's not chicken.
Talking about like
Gross.
growing the cells.
I mean, I don't
You're
know,
growing
he
like
said that
cells
they
of chicken
treat-
meat
like
in a
a
laboratory.
Yeah, they take a piece of the breast of the chicken, and they let it grow, or I don't know what they do, and it looks like chicken. but
And
it's not chicken.
Ew. This is scary to me. There is a video that I watched years ago on YouTube. I don't know. I'm sure you can find it. It was what we searched for was this thing called meat glue. And it wasn't about chicken, it was about beef. So when you get certain cuts of beef, as you know, taking the meats and seafoods class, you get, you cut off and trim certain pieces. And sometimes you're left with nice little chunks of meat, but it's not something that you can say, oh, $13.95 a pound, I'll sell it for that. And so there's this product, I can't remember what company developed it, and I don't know whether it is widely used or not, but it was called meat glue. And you could put those little pieces of meat into a form that looked like a piece of filet, or that looked like the shape of a steak cut that you as a consumer would recognize when you see it in the grocery store. And it's some kind of enzyme and chemical that literally dissolves the meat fibers and literally glues it together. Yes, it was so creepy and gross when I saw that. And I'm sure you could find it on YouTube again, but meat glue is what we say. I know, it's like sometimes I don't want to know some of these things, but
Because they're doing anything for money.
it is. This is, you're eating some extremely unnatural things. Like I have, not even told you the horror stories that some of this stuff could happen.
I don't think some of us wants to know.
I know, some of us don't want to know where our
Then again-
McDonald's burger actually came from,
And
but
again, I've
you can
already
read in your
seen
textbook.
I've seen videos like of actual like live meat, where it's like, or at least temporarily, it's basically made like alive, where it's still moving, it's twitching, and it's like kind of bad.
Yeah, exactly. There's a section in chapter 5, or maybe it's chapter 6, on the American beef industry. And is it chapter 5? Yeah, and so if you are in an industrialized food production capacity, you are not concerned with whether this cow has a nice pasture to run around in, or whether he can even scratch his back. Usually these, you might have a cattle holding pen that's about the size of this room, and I don't know, look around, a cow is, let's assume that the cow is about as big as this table, right? That's how much space do you think, or how many of these tables do you think we could fit in here if there wasn't a space for anything else?
Well, then a lot of times they sell that more expensive because the meat is more tender.
Well, no, this is just a holding pen before I'm about to slaughter him. But they might be in here for like 6 days or something, and a room this size might have like 200 cows in it. You can't move around. Can't do anything. Some of them don't even have feet touching the floor, which is what I think you're probably talking about, like the Wagyu stuff that they force feed. Yeah, and then food becomes like really, some of it's really high priced, some of it's really luxury. The processed part of food takes out a whole bunch of nutrients, and the more processed a food is, the longer the shelf life, the lower the price is. So the more processed, the color is going to be maintained, the seeming freshness is going to be maintained longer, so I can charge less for this because you can leave it on your shelf longer and people will still buy it. And so that overemphasizes social stratification, because the lower amount of income you have, the more likely it is your diet is going to be filled with processed food that's not very nutritious, at least, maybe even harmful because of some of this. And the more money you have access to, the more designer food, or it is designer. I mean, the more designer food or chemical-free food you can afford. And there's a huge price tag. Huge price tag. Yes. So, but that's us. Like, are we being ethnocentric about us right now? Maybe a little bit.
I'm being definitely
Are you being
ethnocentric about us.
Yeah, I'm
Like,
ethnocentric about the meat glue.
I didn't freak out about the bloodletting.
This, so Maasai bloodletting is okay. Industrialized foods are probably not okay. Yes, ma'am.
Well, in our class, we have to watch a video of how animals live and how they are normally slaughtered, and a lot of people have gone vegetarian
Because they see that.
Yeah, and it's like, they have always told us, if you don't understand the ingredients that you read, product, don't buy it. And if you don't see the product, don't buy it. So, because that's how processed foods are nowadays.
Mm-hmm. This is us.
And this is where obesity has gotten.
Well, there's a debate about that. I mean, certainly hormones, when the intention is to grow larger, there certainly hormones can contribute to that. But also just the abundance of calories, the massive amount of calories that we have access to is one of and the sedentary lifestyle, like our subsistence strategy does not require that we go out and hand till our soil and grow. That takes some physical effort and calories to do that, right? So we have a very different, if your job is to be a manicurist and a pedicurist, you're sitting down all day long doing that. That's a very, and you've got all this food available to you, so you're munching on potato chips that were made 6 months ago in Thailand, and they're here.
Calories.
The empty calories and just because it's a snack, yeah. So we have tons of calories available, and that's what empty calorie means, right? Yeah. Okay, so good conversations. We have finished chapter 5. So what we're going to do next time is the economics chapter, and take my word for it, economics can be fun. At least it is in anthropology class, I think. So I will see y'all then.
Are we gonna have a quiz Monday?
Let's have a quiz on Monday.